that Justin Bieber's hanging around with. I mean, you become the average of them in all respects. This is sad. Very sad. So there's our guy, Justin Bieber. We won't go into a whole timeline of the life and times of Justin Bieber. We might put it up on the site just to have a look at it, for you to have a look at it. But it's sad. And I think he's even been abandoned by Usher, his original mentor. Okay, well, what's still percolating? There's still some stuff percolating around the Thank an Indian shirt, which generated a fair amount of reaction from various people. The experience of a Saskatchewan teen who wore a shirt with the message "God land, thank an Indian" to her school and found herself in some hot water is sparking animated discussions on social media about race and Aboriginal relations in Canada. The original news item about Tanel Star on CBC's website garnered close to 100,000 views and attracted around 2,000 comments. Star 13 wore the bright pink hoodie-style sweatshirt to school in Balcarres, Saskatchewan, 90 kilometers northeast of Regina in early January. School officials told her to change the shirt and not wear it again. But after some meetings with Star and leaders of her reserve, officials relented. So, it's sparked a debate, which is a good thing, and a lot of people are talking about it, and that's usually what happens. So, we're going to move on now here. You know, I'm going to just jump right away here to... oh, wait a minute. Here's a little item. I was going to talk about this. Self-preservation. In an article written by Neil MacDonald, Self-Preservation in Gunned-Up America. It's actually difficult to type this, and he's an expatriate, but a lot of what the National Rifle Association is saying these days makes sense. What he's saying is that he's in favor of having cops in the schools. Well, when you get to that point, you got to wonder. So you're really establishing fear in the minds of everybody, parents, students, teachers. We have to be protected. We have to have a guy in the school with a gun, because there could be somebody, it could be an 11-year-old, pop in with a gun to kill somebody. So it's reaching some insane, unjustified proportions. But that's the reality. Assault-style weapons are realities in America. In fact, in many American homes, this was pointed out by a magazine in the Atlantic, announced recently, it was a Bushmaster Christmas, part of a gun-buying spree that began shortly after Obama first came into power and picked up sharply again after the shootings in Connecticut. The Nonpartisan Violence Policy Center says firearms manufacturers are concentrating on marketing assault-style weapons as a priority. Seizing them or forcing people to sell them to the government, as Australia did after the Port Arthur massacre in 1996, would be politically, if not legally, impossible in the U.S. In fact, the Obama administration is not even seriously talking about reinstating the restrictions on newly purchased assault weapons that proved so useless during the 10 years between 1994 and 2004 when such a ban was in effect. The manufacturers simply altered their technical specifications to evade the law. The president does seem determined to do something. Vice President Joe Biden, no comment, has been meeting with the NRA and video game makers and is heading a task force that is to make recommendations as early as tomorrow. But the legal and political walls are so thick around America and its guns that it is hard to imagine any kind of serious breakthrough. Even Gabrielle Giffords, the former Arizona congressman who was shot in the head by a psychotic 2 years ago and has now launched a national campaign for responsible gun control, won't give up her own gun. Okay, let's see here. All right, let's get to... where is it now here? I've kind of lost it in my... Yeah. All right. I don't know. Have any of you heard of Loon? Loon is a Facebook site I found out. It's Canada's voice in the wilderness. I love it. These guys, it's sort of tongue-in-cheek. But some of it makes a lot of sense, and I'm happy that there is a voice other than the traditional media in Canada. I think that CTV does a reasonably good job of questioning a lot of things that are going on in Canada, but I don't know. I'm not sure if it's reaching the average Canadian that it should. But anyways, they talk about the 10 suspicions about Stephen Harper's visit to Israel and why he would go now. So let's just run through these as a wrap-up to the stories behind the headlines this morning. Stephen Harper's government has been, number one, 10 suspicions about Stephen Harper's visit to Israel and why now. Stephen Harper's government has been under protracted siege since May of 2013 as a result of extremely serious allegations of possible criminal behavior by Nigel Wright, his then chief of staff, involving expense improprieties by then Tory senators appointed by him, Wallen, Brazeau, and Duffy. So we know that's happened. In the ongoing scandal, noted Mr. Harper has been all but mute, refusing to budge from his talking points mantra and recycling the denial-laced version of Shaggy's I love what they're talking about. They're drawing some correlation to the pop chart topper by Shaggy. It was called "It Wasn't Me." On a practical note, albeit off-key, how is that in the midst of being incommunicado on issues of vital importance to the Canadian people, some of which approached and passed into crisis mode months back, the Prime Minister is able to meet face-to-face, let alone jam, with a group of semi-professional musicians on a regular basis? While a singular listen to Prime Minister Harper and his band may bring on any suggestions that they have rehearsed for any length of time, who is paying for these clowns to fly to their concert gigs like the Tories' Calgary Convention or the Negative Dinner in Toronto last year? But from a cultural and economic perspective, with Canada's arts community struggling on a millennial basis for funding and its very existence, largely as a result of neocon economic policies that favor private sector sponsorship over government endowments, is the image of our Prime Minister yucking it up with Chad Kroeger of Nickelback and multimillionaire Bryan Adams not a further slap to struggling artists, many of whom are contemplating fleeing the country to more culturally receptive climes. Although Harper's time-worn political strategy of emphasizing foreign threats to our way of life, I'm sure that's a concern in a farmer in Prince Albert, Saskatchewan, is sitting there as he's milking his cows. He's thinking, my God, a terrorist could be popping into the barn here at any time. So it's kind of like Wag the Dog or the Maggie Thatcher Falklands War White Paper or Nixon's final days in the White House when he was drunkenly fetching with a portrait of Abe Lincoln. It remains disconcerting, even alarming, that the Canadian Prime Minister would play 2015 federal election chess using the Israel versus the rest of the world scenario as a foil. Harper's foreign policy has continued to move Canada further and further from the camp of progressive, enlightened international cooperation and pro-third world development into the encircled camp of vehement pro-Israel obsequescence, bordering on dogmatic. Harper's position that Israel is, according to his pandering pre-show remarks to the 2013 Negative Dinner in Toronto, the only bulwark bastion of Western civilization in a region of darkness, ranks on the ill-advised comment index alongside Toronto Mayor Mel Lastman's comment a few years back that if he traveled to Africa, he'd be boiled in a pot by natives. The Prime Minister's evident desire to publicly bestow oral and oral blandishments on the pro-Israel make that pro-Netanyahu camp is suspiciously dovetailed with his government's own heavily shrouded Christian fundamentalist agenda, namely to promote the survival of the Jewish state for the singular, twisted, and mythical objective of fulfilling purported biblical prophecy that would supposedly see us all gird our loins for the end days, culminating in a clash on the Israeli plain of Armageddon between the Antichrist and Christian friends of the Jewish people. Now, bear in mind that Stephen Harper is probably the first Prime Minister in Canada that is an openly, I wouldn't say we want to use the term born-again Christian, but clearly his Christian beliefs and so forth. I mean, a lot of Canadians may not know that because they don't talk about it much, but it's certainly there. Harper's, and finally, I think that the final point here is that Harper's derogatory assertions to his negative concert crowd that Mick Jagger and the Rolling Stones used to be worshiping Satan, kind of bad, is indicative of how the Prime Minister and his followers play fast and loose with historical accuracy to ingratiate themselves to gullible fans. Hopefully, though, unlike folks who have had the misfortune of seeing Harper's musical performances, the slag fell on deaf ears. Well, it's a rather humorous, but in some cases, reality bites of the reasons and the suspicions we have about Stephen Harper's visit to Israel. Why now? I mean, after 7 years, if he was such a great friend of Israel, how come he didn't go before? I mean, granted, they're giving him an award, not an award, but they're naming a bird sanctuary after him, and if that's probably, that might be enough reason for him to want to go to Israel, because there's an honor being bestowed on him. And I think as in the latter days of his reign here in Canada, he wants to have something to grab onto, some legacy, some memory that people think highly of him. We're talking about a very insecure individual here who's not really a statesman, but more, you've got to kind of feel sorry. I don't feel sorry for Stephen Harper, but there's something missing here that we all, it's like it's so obvious. We don't want to talk about it a lot, but there's so many obvious political intertwining here with the timing of his trip to Israel, the pat on the back from Netanyahu. Last night, Lisa LaFlamme was given 10 minutes for an interview with Netanyahu. Stephen Harper in Canada will not allow reporters within 10 meters of him. They can't ask questions. Everything has to be it's a photo op, no questions. There's so much about this that is so obvious that if we start thinking with our own heads rather than anybody else's head, we'll understand the true nature of this. It's all political. There's absolutely no question in my mind whether he has some personal. Something personal, certainly a vendetta against the United Nations, because he's always been at war with the United Nations and feels shunned by them. Most world leaders don't think very much of Stephen Harper. He's not the elevator doesn't go to the top floor. He's an economist. He's not the brightest, or the crispiest chip in the box, shall we say. So his personality isn't that warm and fuzzy. He's so you're talking about his own personal desire as to what kind of legacy he wants for himself. So it's very, very egocentric, very narcissistic, and in many cases, I've said before, I make no bones about it, there are some sociopathic tendencies that he has. Look at the record in Canada. Look at his abuse of the Aboriginal people, the Veterans Affairs Department, which is a mess. The tearing down of the Canada Post. There's so many things that he has done to the Canadian people with total disregard for them that you've got to weigh that very heavily with, I don't care what your political beliefs are. I'm not saying that I'm, left wing, right wing, middle, NDP, liberal. I'm not saying any of that. I'm saying look at the individual, look at his track record, look at his performance, and the proof is at some point, everybody words are cheap. Actions speak louder than words, and certainly that's been the case with Stephen Harper. Okay, enough of that. It's been a Friday morning of venting, so we're not going to do that anymore. We're going to give you the weather, which is probably the most interesting part of the show this morning for those of you getting ready for the weekend. It's minus right now in overcast. Excuse me, -1 in overcast in Peachland right now. We've got some fog patches, and it actually feels like -5. It's very damp and foggy. Fog patches. This afternoon, though, the sun is going to break out. We're going to have a temperature of 2 degrees. This evening, fog patches will return. Overnight low of -2, and we will wake up tomorrow morning to a temperature of 2 degrees, and then in the it'll rise to 2 degrees by the afternoon. And then on Sunday, expect variable cloudiness with a high of 2. Monday, mainly sunny and a high of 2. Tuesday, sunny and a high of 3. Wednesday, sunny and a high of 2. Wow, we're going to have sunshine all the way through. Isn't that great? The clouds are going to break up, fog, etc. So once again, -1 as we gaze out at the beautiful shores of Lake Lake Okanagan. All right, that's it for me. I'm out of here. Stay tuned for the rest